Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you all for joining our virtual fireside chat. I'm Colleen Zupan, Director of Business Development here at GEP. I've had the privilege of working with some of the leading Fortune 2000 companies, both on the global enterprise side as well as local here to North America. I really look forward to spending some time with all of you today, where we're going to talk about establishing a successful contract management office. So over the next 60 minutes, we're going to be discussing some of the key components, strategies, and success indicators that's really needed to set up a CMO office for your organization. But rest assured, we are going to leave about 15 minutes at the end of our session for any questions that the audience might have. So for our discussion, it's really divided into 3 sections. It's going to cover the business case, the steps needed to get started, and really what success metrics look like. And how do you make sure you're on the right track? So during our conversation, we'll be talking to experts Marco Martinez from Centerpoint Energy and Marcy Goodsell from GEP. They're going to share their expertise, insights, and practical experiences needed for a successful CMO. So I do want to take just a couple of minutes to introduce you to our experts today. I'm pleased to introduce Marco Martinez. He's the Director of Vendor Risk Management at Centerpoint Energy. He has over 24 years of industry experience, and in his current position, he's responsible for programs aimed at managing vendor risk assessments, and risk mitigations. He's helped create and oversee the contract management office within the supply chain at Centerpoint. And Marcy is a senior manager at GEP. She has over 25 years of source to contract experience, really specializing in implementation of contract management services teams for procurement and legal organizations. She leads the Global Contract Management Services Center of Excellence, focused on leveraging and integrating the industry best practices, process, tools, and technology for GEP, and has been able to instill really strong contract management practices, processes, and policies, reducing risk and compliance violations and regulation fines. So with that, Marco and Marcy, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Colleen, thank you, and looking forward to the conversation today.
Fantastic. Well, now that you know a little bit about who we are, I say we kick things off. I really want to start by diving into that business case and setting up a contract management office or CMO. So with that said, Marco, can you share what some of the primary drivers or motivators have been behind establishing a CMO office?
Colleen, glad to do so. Before we get into that, I'd like to talk about how things were done before to set that baseline. Before we established the CMO, we had our sourcing specialists doing it all. And what does that mean? That means they did everything from sourcing to contracting. So they met with the business to understand the service or the goods that were needed. They did the market intelligence to find the best vendors out there that could provide those services or goods. They then bid out the work. They analyzed the bids, developed a scorecard. And so that in and of itself is quite a bit of the value add that we expect from our sourcing group. They then negotiated the contracts, including the MSA, and they were the quarterbacks of the contracts between commercial legal, our internal stakeholders, our risk subject matter experts, as well as the vendor. And then they were responsible for executing the contract and ensuring that there was a complete contract package that was uploaded into the system of record, which obviously led to some challenges and some inefficiencies there. So I'll start off by the benefits of the CMO and the reason that we decided to establish a CMO. First, it freed up the sourcing specialist to focus on those value add tasks that I mentioned before. That is getting the best vendors at the best price, while making sure that we're mitigating and managing risk. And it also avoided some of the challenges that we were seeing, which is in some instances, when they focus on bringing the right vendors in and doing all of the negotiating, by the time it gets to the contract, they may be on to the next value add opportunity, right? So the contract piece may have been neglected to some sense. And so the benefit of the CMO is having a group that is laser focused on making sure that there's a complete contract package and we have all the supporting documentation to hold ourselves accountable and to hold the vendor accountable, so that at the end of the day, we make sure that we're getting that value that was agreed upon within the contract.
Marco, you touched on here, some of the challenges, obviously making sure that, you had a complete contract process and nothing was missed. Can you maybe expand a little bit about maybe some of the other risks or challenges that you might need to mitigate for within the organization?
So one of the key things that we want to make sure that we look at is we fully understand what it is that we're buying and the risks that we're introducing to the company. Right. And so some of that may be, are we sharing any data with the vendor, and what is the magnitude of sensitivity of that data? Is the vendor going to have access to our systems? Is there a safety risk, et cetera? And so understanding those risks help us craft a contract that's fit for purpose, to make sure that we again are safeguarding the company, our customers, and our employees from those potential risks that could happen, whether it be a safety or a cyber incident, to use as an example.
No, I think that's helpful. I think, I always like to hear more stories and bring things to life. Perhaps you can share a case study that, and Marcy, feel free to jump in here too, that really demonstrates the value or the impact of a CMO from organizational efficiency and cost effectiveness.
Colleen, if you don't mind, I'll jump in and discuss maybe high level the overall strategy and objectives, and how the CMO ties into the Centerpoint strategy. Because that is one of the ways that I like to make sure that we approach everything, is aligning to the overall goal and strategy of the company. And so in general, Centerpoint's key goal as a gas and an electric utility is to make sure that we're delivering energy reliably and safely to our customers. And we're doing so at a reasonable cost to our customers, while earning the expected results for our investments. So I'll start off with the safe and reliable piece of it. We rely heavily on vendors and contractors to perform key construction work. And how do we hold those vendors accountable? It is through a good crafted contract. It is through a good crafted statement of work. And so making sure that we are, again, providing that safety and reliable work to our customers is key. And the contracts is the way that we hold our vendors accountable. And quite frankly, the way that we hold ourselves accountable as well. We want to make sure that we're clear, transparent in terms of the expectations. And a contract and a statement of work is really the key ways to do that. And there's also the making sure that we get the agreed value in there. And so in our statements of work, we want to make sure that we're clear to the vendor of what that anticipated result is, whether it's a key deliverable or a good that we're buying. We want to make sure that that's clearly articulated in there, and we're holding the vendor accountable. And so what that means is basically adding verbiage in there that says, hey, there's going to be a clawback if you're not delivering what we agreed that you would be delivered. And again, that's clearly articulated in the statement of work. Alternatively, we might say, hey, there's a 1 or 2% amount that you're going to get if you deliver these quality services. So you can kind of use the carrot or the stick approach. But at the end of the day, it's that clarity to say, this is what we expect to get for this expected price.
And Colleen, just to add to that, so you're really bringing in the focus of those industry best practices by doing that, by establishing that CMO office. You really have that opportunity to bring the focus into the areas that you're going to have the sourcing managers really focus on getting that value for your customers, for your organization overall. With the CMO, it also brings in the opportunity to be that gatekeeper for compliance, and seeing the importance of conducting and obtaining the proper documentation and approval for your third-party risk. So those all are some additional components that when you bring in a CMO office to your organization, that's their focus, is really making sure that that document, that contract is fully developed, everything is clearly detailed and depicted in the agreement itself. And then you have the backing and making sure that it's compliant, the risk is diverted, it's mitigated, and that it's also housed in an area in that repository that can be reviewed, evaluated. It's that source of truth.
Okay. No, so I think now that we really understand, like, there's a need and you've got the businesses buy-in, you know, let's kind of take it to the next step, right? What do you need to do to establish this contract management office to your internal organization? You've got their buy-in, all your shareholders are excited about it. They said, yes, we've got to do this. Now what? So maybe, Marco, you can kick things off. You know, you just lived it, you went through it. What were some of the initial steps that you took when setting up that contract management office from scratch?
You know, I think some of it is what we've touched on a little bit, but the very first step is understand your current process, right? Map it out. And by doing that, the challenges and the risks are going to fall out. Alternatively, we also looked at it from the lens of what needs to be fixed or optimized. And so in doing so, it was clear to us after doing some research that there would be benefits of standing up a CMO. But in general, I guess is going back to your specific question. One of the things that we did is some research, right? Trying to figure out, hey, these are the challenges that we have. How do companies that have best practices implemented tackle these risks or challenges? And it was very evident that the CMO is really the way to go about doing that. Next step is determine what resources you're going to need to stand up the CMO. And as you very much articulated, Colleen, it's obtaining management approval by articulating those challenges that are being mitigated or risks that are being mitigated, the benefits, the efficiencies that are going to be gained. And really, once you articulate that, and I mean, they see the pain points in the process as it is, because they are, in many cases, either themselves or their direct reports are key internal clients of procurement or supply chain. And so they see the challenges, and it's very easy to articulate the benefits that would come from setting up a contract management office.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, to summarize, do your homework, look at what needs to be fixed and optimized, and then go from there. So maybe let's build upon that. So what are those key components or requirements that you need to focus on to make sure that, you're going to be successful?
I think a lot of this boils down to good change management. And that means, bringing everybody along the journey, identifying who does this change impact, right? And obviously start off by getting management buy-in, which we've covered already, but it's also who are the key contributors. And for us, right off the bat, it's procurement and it's commercial legal, right? And so it's making sure that we're working hand in hand with them, right? And that they are a part of building the process. Because at the end of the day, if we build it together, we don't have to convince those folks that it is a good thing to do. At that point, it's like, hey, we built this together, and we have additional folks within the company that are then ambassadors to the rest of the company of why this is a good idea and why it adds value to the organization, right? Beyond that, making sure that you identify what your budget need is, right? And identify those resources, whether it's a budget, whether it's individuals, whether it is the system. And some of that is looking at what you already have within the organization, right? Are there individuals with the talent that can be repurposed into this new area. Um, Beyond that, set clear expectations and goals for the CMO, right? So that people have an idea of what you expect to deliver, and there isn't any gray space in terms of expectations. And it holds the CMO accountable, and it makes sure that everybody again is fully aware of what is going to be done. Beyond that, it's developing roles and responsibilities, having a clear matrix so that people don't have questions of saying, hey, for instance, I discussed that sourcing specialist covered the entire gamut of procurement in the past. And so at this point, it's like, well, what am I going to be doing going forward? Where does my role start? Where does it stop? And having a good matrix really lets people know what their roles and responsibilities are. And it also clarifies some of the questions, right? Anytime that, even though we see it as a benefit, we're freeing up your time to do value add sourcing activities. Anytime that roles and responsibilities are quote unquote taken away from somebody, the question is like, what am I going to be doing? How am I going to be continuing to add value? So it's making sure that we articulate clearly that we want you to focus on those value add opportunities. And this is a good thing for you and the organization. And a good matrix or a clear matrix really helps with that. It's also developing desktop procedures and flow charts so that, again, people know what is expected, but they know how to do it as well. And finally, the goalpost for us, if you will, is developing those playbooks with fallback provisions, right? So that we can really get into those efficiencies. And again, that is really the end game, so that we can work efficiently with commercial legal and procurement to deliver that result that ultimately our internal stakeholders are really looking for.
And then I can go ahead and add on to that, because one of the parts of that whole change management is getting that buy-in, right? So you kind of have that opportunity to roadshow it, to sell it to the organization. With bringing in all those industry best practices that Marco was speaking about, it's also very helpful to illustrate to the organization the benefits. So those playbooks that you have, those desktop procedures that give the specifics, but you can tie that all together with, and this is the efficiency that's gained, and this is where the service levels can be tied to it. So because now that you see the roles and responsibilities, the process has been outlined as a more efficient, streamlined process, that this is my offering to the organization, that I will be able to then report back at those service levels. So your turnaround times for that first initial draft will be lessened, or maybe even the red line review, identifying the commercial terms versus the legal terms, and reaching out to the proper portions of the organization to get that information. So that way, when it does get to legal for their review, their input, their approval, they're not having to kind of dig through the contract. They will have seen that CMO has reached out to the business to get the information, has reached out to insurance, and so on. It makes it a much more efficient process end to end for your business.
Thank you both for that. So what I'm hearing in this discussion is that you've got a way to prioritize the resources, tying it to the budget, looking at your tools, looking at your personnel, and really making sure that it's going to be an effective functioning CMO. That's what I'm hearing in this conversation. I guess one other question on my mind, we kind of scratched the surface on it, but what role does technology play in supporting and streamlining these operations of the CMO, and how should that be integrated into the setup process?
From that perspective, I think, and I've been a witness to it, technology plays a very important role in the establishment of that source to contract experience. If you have that technology that can change from a sourcing event, once it's awarded, flip to a contract and actually go through the life cycle of a contract within the tool. So building that workspace, selecting the proper template, collaborating, making sure that the contract is worded properly, and then actually being able to conduct redline review and negotiations within the tool itself, that technology, it makes it so much smoother. You're going to see the version control. You're going to see all the comments. And then once it's actually been fully negotiated, you can do the approvals in the technology itself. You can obtain signatures in that same technology with Adobe Sign, DocuSign. And then it automatically can go straight away back into that platform that you've selected, that technology. So then it's your true source of truth, source to contract. And you assign profiles, you assign personas, you can put in your governance on who should be approving, who should be signing. So it really documents that whole process for you. So it's nice. It feeds off that audit and compliance because it's all right there for you.
Yeah, really bringing that whole idea of efficiency and making everyone who's doing this and stretched and working so hard, making things a lot simpler for them. Okay, so
For us in operations, I think it standardizes the process and it really limits, right, some of those manual things that could go wrong. Those are the two key takeaways that I would just add to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, great points. So let's start talking about what success looks like now that we have an idea of what you need to do to set it up. Now that we've got the CMO up and running, how are you defining and measuring success for the CMO on an ongoing basis?
So that's a great question, Colleen, and one that we're actually living right now, right? Which let me caveat that by saying that our CMO is fairly new, and so we are going through those that growing maturity process. So I will say, setting up a CMO takes time, um, and it takes time to introduce change, right? Like anytime you're introducing change, we all know this, you're also introducing disruption. You know what your end goal is, and you know the efficiencies that you're going to gain, but it takes time to get to that point, right? And so know when you're going into it that things may actually not be better from the get-go, and more than likely they will not. But stick with it, keep going through that process, because how we define success is making sure that the contract execution is going faster than what we have today. And that is one of the key challenges that we identified, right? Making sure that the CMO is making sure that we have all of the required documentation so that by the time it gets to legal or the time it gets to risk or cybersecurity team, they have all the information in front of them to make that decision of in terms of what a contract should look like and what type of protections it should have. And so it is creating that efficiency in executing contracts quicker, because at the end of the day, our internal stakeholders care about one thing. They're like, how quick can I have this vendor on the ground with that shovel, right?
Yeah.
And they don't really care whether it's in procurement, CMO, risk, etc. All they care about is that contract. And so what the CMO's key metric is delivering those contracts to execution at a quicker rate. One of the other challenges that we had was making sure that we had a complete contract package, an executed contract with everything that supported a contract. So, I mean, for the sake of transparency, and we all know this, right? There's things that sometimes go wrong in business. And that may lead to a safety incident, may lead to a cyber incident, and in some cases, it leads to legal implications. So making sure that we have a complete contract package really safeguards the company and helps mitigate that risk, right? Whether it's holding the vendor accountable for what they did financially, and or also relying on that insurance provider, right? I mean, there are some instances that we've seen in the past um, where if you don't have a properly executed agreement, sometimes an insurance carrier will say, nope, we're not covering you because we need that documentation that really says that you have a relationship with our vendor. And so it is those kind of things that are really key to making sure that we have that. And so the benefit to the CMO and the success factor there is that our contract QA reviews will have a much higher success rate of having a good contract in the system the first time without having to go dig and ask for additional information. So I would say that from the beginning, those are the key metrics that we're looking at to benefit from the CMO.
Fantastic. No, I think hearing what I think most people want to agree to when it comes to setting this up, speed has to be key, and making sure that you've got a complete package. Marcy, I'm going to direct this one to you. Um, you know, what additional key performance metrics have you seen or indicators have you seen to really address that effective and efficiency, besides just the obvious, which is speed? What other things are you tracking?
So a lot of other things that we look at is, though we do track speed, right? Your turnaround time, it also has to do a lot with what can be considered from a complexity standpoint. For example, oftentimes people may think a statement of work, oh, that's simple, that's low complexity. Actually, a statement of work can become very complex because you're really trying to work hard at defining those commercial language and clauses that are relevant to the deal, right? So if something goes wrong, you have to have that developed statement of work really detailing out the specifics. The other part that we do, and we really consider this an industry best practice, is your service levels end to end, and then also quality. Sometimes that's overlooked because they look at it from, oh, okay, we got to get this done really quickly. But what about the quality? So building in those other tools like a quality checklist or an internal audit of your work, making sure that the contract package is complete, that all the documents are housed in the repository that you have, as well as the data that's in the repository matches up to the contract. Because the key part of that is that information is used by the sourcing team, by the business. It's for audit and compliance, what have we agreed to? And so if that information's not correct, then that's going to cause some, I would say, grayness in what you really need. So I think turnaround time, your service levels with regards to the performance overall, quality is very important, and completeness.
Great. So now that we know what to track and how to track it, let's make it a little more difficult. Let's talk about what continuous improvement looks like and the evolution of your CMO office. The pace at which businesses are changing and needs and the market dynamics, that's not going to stop. So how are you managing to that?
Colleen, so I'll start off by saying that at Centerpoint, we've introduced a continuous improvement mindset. And we're so committed to that approach that we have a team, a department really, dedicated to facilitating those events when a challenge or a process is identified. We actually leverage that process as part of identifying the need for a CMO. But with that in mind, I mean, we're constantly looking at the process to determine if things are working well, or if they can be tweaked to be working even better if they are in fact working as intended. As far as the CMO is concerned, as I mentioned before, we're in the early stages of the maturity journey. My plan is to evaluate the process and the results of the CMO in 2025 and identify areas where we can improve. That being said, we're also having key touch points with our key stakeholders, our key partners, right? Procurement, commercial, legal, and we're asking them what's working well, what isn't working well, taking that information, digesting it, seeing patterns, seeing what things could be done better, and then tweaking the process along the way. One thing that I'd like to caution folks is that as you get started, those process improvements are going to fall out fairly seamlessly, fairly quickly. I'll caution folks who are planning to do this in the future, don't try to implement every change as it's coming out. Maybe do a quarterly or semi-annual change because you have to give the process time and not consistently be changing as things identify. I mean, as much of a fan as I am of a dynamic, nimble approach, you don't want to be making changes every week or every other week. You're going to create quite the confusion, and it might negatively impact the CMO. So, periodic CI review would be good, but also quarterly or semi-annual adjustments as you go through the process.
Excellent. So, Marcy and Marco, I am starting to see a few questions coming in. So I think this is a good time to, just take a pause. I'm gonna start asking you some questions that are coming from the audience. So the first one that I see here, how do CMOs ensure quality control and regulatory compliance in their processes?
So I can take this one, and then please, Marco, chime in. But it becomes that gatekeeper that we've talked about. So because they are that conduit with third-party risk, with legal, they are able to put measures in those gatekeep, that mentality of making sure the proper documentation is there, making sure that until approval is obtained from third-party risk, you're not entering into a contract that's going to put your organization at risk. So those measures are actually incorporated into the process itself, and then they are measured. So again, that goes into making sure that the quality is there. You're going to have a checklist. You're going to have a tool that's going to help you validate that information, conducting audits of the work to validate that the proper documentation and data is in the workspaces properly. So that's going to build on that. But having that, I would say, relationship directly with the commercial legal, with your legal organization, with risk, all of that just really solidifies the overall process that the CMO has to be tracked to, confirming that we're making sure everything is done to those regulations, and then addressing it with the business if it's not.
Colleen, I can add that from our perspective, we have a procurement risk assessment form. And that I think really aligns to what Marcy is talking about. It really captures what it is that we're buying in very clear layman's terms, right? Are we buying office supplies, or are we buying a service that somebody's going to be working on our electric lines? That a lot of times really dictates the regulatory or compliance piece to it, right? It also goes into, are they going to be accessing our systems or our data? So then you have your cyber compliance piece that falls into that. Is there going to be anything that impacts the environmental piece? And so that form really develops that inherent risk that downstream legal can take into consideration, the insurance group can take into consideration, et cetera, so that we're building that good contract that is really fit for purpose. And in some cases, that goes the other way, right? If somebody doesn't have, for instance, any aerial type equipment, whether that's helicopters, drones, etc., then that may actually take a piece of the terms and conditions out, and we don't have to spend any time negotiating something that really is unnecessary at that point. So those are some of the key components in the way that the CMO really helps with making sure that we have those good compliance pieces captured in the agreement.
Great. A couple other questions. We've got one that, kind of takes us back to the start and, working with internal stakeholders. The question is, are there any specific strategies or tactics that should be used when introducing the concept of a CMO to the internal stakeholders and really gaining their support?
I think in terms of that strategy, I'll go back to what I shared before, and it's really bringing them along the journey, right? It's sharing with them what the benefits are and what their roles are, and at the end of the day, really is like what they're going to get out of it, right? And it's really those key benefits, and really articulating those, being clear about that, but also level setting, because sometimes the expectation can be, for instance, for procurement, it could be, hey, I don't have to touch a contract ever again. Then that is not necessarily the case. So again, it's making sure that they know the benefits, but they also know the role that they have to play in the success of the CMO, and ultimately getting down to those SLAs and those metrics that we talked about earlier. Is like, what is their role to play in that as well?
And I'll just add that the one approach that I've seen that is imperative is because we are dealing with legally binding agreements, contracts, having that buy-in and support from legal right away in the onset of that is very impactful when you can showcase how this will be beneficial to them. It's not going to be that lift and shift anymore, that we're going to work to make sure that they have efficiencies as well, but they still are the owners of those contract templates that we're selecting from, the clauses, and we're still looking for their input, their approval. So giving them that reassurance that we're not taking over, we're just there to support and make the process more efficient for them. I have found that once legal has that buy-in, it makes it much simpler. And it can be also very cost effective in that manner, because some organizations don't have the capacity from a legal perspective. So they end up actually then having to look to outside counsel to help in assisting these commercial contracts. And that's a very expensive outsourcing that you take on. When you can do something in-house, that's already giving that opportunity that you're saving those legal fees that come with that.
Well, that's really great. So I've got maybe one more question for both of you. Vishnu Prasad asks a really great one. How effective is a CMO in implementing a remote work environment?
I like how we both kind of sit there.
I mean, I can mention what we do, and we have a hybrid environment here at Centerpoint, meaning we're in the office 3 days and we work remote 2 days. As far as the CMO impacting or vice versa, or the remote impacting the CMO, I mean, I think we can effectively do our work either way. I mean, I will add the days that we are here in the office, it is very easy to walk over to somebody's desk and say, hey, my contract is stuck. How can we move it along? But by the same token, you can get on Teams and do the same thing, right? And so I would say in general, it doesn't impact it one way or the other. It works just as effectively in any case.
And with that too, when you're establishing that CMO, you build in those extra tools that allow you to be able to work remotely. The one positive that can come from actual in-office implementation is that there's a collaboration there. And it does, as Marco said, yes, it's easy if somebody can come over to your desk and ask for the status. The other part of it is it's the collaboration of the CMO team members themselves. What did have you experienced something different? How did you handle it? Should I reach out to this? It's that immediate gratification, but it brings in that lessons learned in a faster, more efficient way. So there are benefits, but I mean, from the most part, if you have a strong tool and you have strong bandwidth, you can work remotely as well, as long as those tools that help make sure that that quality and the process is still followed and you have reporting and tracking, it can be done remotely as well.
I mean, I'd like to expand on the resources that we talked about earlier, if you don't mind. So while we covered the resources, the prioritization of those resources is something that I'd really like to elaborate at this point. So one of the key pieces, as I mentioned before, is personnel. And so it is really key to start by making sure what experience and qualities you're looking for in those individuals, right? I mean, that's going to be first and foremost. And then as you're building out a CMO, I would say start from the top down, and that's the approach we did, right? It's like find that manager or that individual that's going to lead the organization. Make sure that they not only have the technical capability, but the management people capability, because it is going to be challenging anytime you're making change. And they are going to have to be the ones that really drive that change. So making sure that you have a good manager that you can depend and rely on to help the CMO, and then hire the right team is going to be absolutely key. I'll piggyback on what Marcy said. Leveraging the CLM systems to the full extent possible is going to be something that you absolutely should do. And then I'll say it's going to take time, effort, and money to stand up a CMO. And a lot of times, if your company is like ours, is we need to get results as we're building the process, right? And so how do we go about doing that efficiently? And for us at Centerpoint, we wanted to make sure that we partnered with somebody that had good background and knew what good looked like and could share those best practices. So we actually leveraged GEP to help us set up that and develop that strategy, guide us through the resource needs, develop the high-level procedures in Matrix. And we did so because we wanted to make sure that we were leveraging somebody that knew what good looked like and knew how we could set up that roadmap for our overall goal, which was building a center of excellence with contract management in mind. And as much as research and white papers can do, there's no substitute for having somebody that can really share what it looks like and guide you through the process. But wanted to make sure that I elaborated on that key piece because it is a key component to making sure that we have a good, successful CMO.
Marco, thank you so much. I think what we've heard in our session today, and what I've heard is once you get that stakeholder buy-in, you need to make sure that you're bringing in the right people to build the right process, that you're leveraging the right technology, making sure that you've got strong change management and continuous improvement plan with the right partner. So I think with that said, we'll close out our session here. For the audience, if you have any other questions that you'd like to ask Marco or Marcy, please feel free to reach out to me directly. I'll make sure that we get any additional questions that pop up after answered. We'll also make sure that this live fireside chat is available in case people had to drop off or want to share it with other teammates. We'll have that ready in about a day. So feel free to reach out to me for that as well. With that being said, Marco, Marcy, thank you so much for your time today. I know I learned a lot and really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you all. Hope you have a great day.
You too.
Oh, yes, you too.